Yani gerek olmayabilir ya, şey yaparız. Yani herkes... Good morning, dear participants. First of all, today Turkey is commemorating Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the founder of the Republic, who led our country into independence on November 10. And today is the 83rd anniversary of his passing. For this reason, I would like to open the event by stating of importance of this day. We remember Atatürk with respect, gratitude, and appreciation. Now, let's turn our side event. As you know, climate change impacts all disciplines, and therefore multidimensional solutions should be found in all areas. Environmental inspection is one of the important areas to reflect the special case of climate change policies. The last point arriving in the climate crisis and the regulations happened in this direction in Turkey, will lead to radical change in implementations. And absolutely, environmental inspections play an important role in the tackling against climate change. All activities having a pollution effect on the environment and contribute in particular human-induced climate change are subject to environmental inspection. On the other hand, all facilities subject to environmental permit and license fully comply with their current environmental permits, they would still have an increasing negative impact on the climate change. Revising environmental inspections and permit or license and with climate change perspective is one of the important steps to be taken in this regard. In this context, the strengthening environmental inspection capacity in Marmara Sea Basin project, which we carried out jointly with Istanbul Technical University, continue in order to increase national preparedness and the capacity. This project is to avoid the adverse impacts of global climate change to adapt to those impacts. For this reason, in this event, I would like to introduce you to three valuable people going to share their valuable ideas and experiences with us today. First of all, I would like to introduce Mr. Simon Bingham, from International Development Manager from the Scottish Environment Protection Agency. Welcome. Professor Dr. Erdem Görgün, the lecturer from the Istanbul Technical University, and he will be in our Zoom connection. Good morning, Erdem Görgün.
Good morning, everyone.
And Pınar Ece Karar, environmental inspector from the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. And now, after introducing these valuable people, I would like to give the floor to Simon for their presentation.
Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yes. Okay, while we get the presentation up, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Simon Bingham. I'm the International Development Manager with the Scottish Environment Protection Agency that's based here in Scotland. I basically work in international development, capacity building, around the globe, and I've worked from all the way from Scotland to as far east as South Korea. So my role takes me quite far ahead. Okay, I don't want to update Office, so we'll move on. So first, thank you very much for introducing or giving me the opportunity to speak here and for introducing me with those kind words. I'd just like to get straight on with the presentation, because we don't have too long this morning, only 20 minutes. A little bit about myself. So my background's in environmental management. I'm not an academic. I'm a practitioner. I've been an inspector, a permitter, implementer of new legislation, and my experience covers multi-countries over 27 years. And I've been doing international capacity building for the last 15 years. And that's basically just trying to share the knowledge and experience that I've learned along my journey, and share best practice with as many people as possible. A little bit about my own agency. SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, is SEPA's principal environmental regulator. We're kind of a one-stop shop regulator. We do implementation, policy, permitting, inspection, and enforcement all in the same organization. We've got 22 offices around Scotland, including on some of the islands. And we also have a frontline service that looks at flood forecasting, flood warning, and strategic flood risk management, where we can very much see the effects of climate change. SEPA, as is the Turkish ministry, is a member of IMPEL, the EU network for the implementation and enforcement of environmental law. And this organization is based in Brussels. There's 55 member organizations from 36 different countries, and it's all about networking, carrying out projects together, and capacity building in different countries. So I was a member of the board of IMPEL for 9 years and leader of its cross-cutting expert group. And I'm also here talking on their behalf. However, it's worth saying, this is a disclaimer, that there's 55 organizations in IMPEL, and I can't speak on behalf of all of them, or even say that I'm speaking on behalf of any of them. So here goes. So I think it was, as was part of the introduction, if all the sites that we regulate within our own agencies actually comply with their full requirements in their permits, there will still be a significant increasing negative impact on the climate. That's fairly fundamental. That it means that if we keep going as we're doing, in the same format that we're doing, without a change in legislation or without a change in approach, us as regulators will not be helping the, climate change at all. A couple of recent documents that have highlighted this. So one was from the Environment Agency in England, which is probably the biggest environmental regulator in Europe, in their Living Better with Climate Change report. They identified that environmental regulation is not ready for changing climate. Fairly fundamental. There's a gap there. Also, in IMPEL's latest implementation challenge survey, which just closed a week ago, when asked what the main challenges you've faced in your role relating to climate change and regulation of its causes and impacts, 43% highlighted that legislation doesn't provide opportunities to regulate to protect against impacts of climate change. What this tells us is that there's a gap. Although there's regulatory devices such as F-gas or emission trading schemes, most sites aren't covered by those regulations. So there's things like the Industrial Emissions Directive, Water Framework Directive, Waste Framework Directive. Those sites don't necessarily have any climate change duties placed upon them. It's quite easy to say that it'll take time to develop the regulatory tools and legal instruments that we need. That's true. It's also quite true to say that we don't have enough resources to actually do everything that we need to. That's not an excuse. That's the way it is. But we have to do something now anyhow. And I think that's the important thing, is the future is now. So although this presentation is very much about looking far into the future, I'm bringing us very much into the here and now. there are things that we can do as regulators to change the way that we regulate, how we regulate now. Some organizations have been on a journey for several years, others have still got to catch up, but it's just a discussion around that. So you'll see in this slide, I talk about long-term, medium-term, short-term. Those abbreviations are used in the rest of the slide, so please bear that in mind. Long-term doesn't have to be a long way in advance. That could be 3 years, 5 years. It could be even less than that, depending on your ability to change legislation at an individual level. So some things will definitely need legislative change. Some may need ministerial approval. Some things regulators can just do themselves, and they can do it now. A lot of this is about using the resources that we have wisely and using them in the most appropriate fashion. So this is the traditional regulatory cycle. Inspections are part of that. So some directives, some bits of legislation actually have requirements where we have to do inspections, not many. This drives the need to introduce permits to sites, and that could be one site per permit, or it could be many sites per permit. We would then do some form of risk assessment that would identify whether or not we need to do compliance monitoring, so whether we're going to do planned inspections. We'd carry out those inspections and do some form of assessment to find out if they're compliant or not compliant, and then we would normally go through the process again. However, there's other things in the mix here. So if for instance, we identify there's environmental complaints, we need to do unplanned inspections. They should also go into the compliance assessment process. And where we find non-compliance, we should be doing something about that, whether that's enforcement, education, or support for them to become non-compliant. If we can't get a site to become compliant, we must look to move to closing that site down through revocation of a permit or other features like that. So that's a basic regulatory cycle. And I'm going to talk about the different elements of this because we can change all of these and what we do in this space. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the first two boxes, legislation and permits. So the legislation is often the hardest one to change. This requires a lot of work, a lot of consultation, a lot of political will, but we can do that. And we can consolidate legislation, we can bring in new powers. That in itself can drive changes in permits and inspections. And we need some changes in legislation. As I've already showed, there's a gap. So having new powers to enable transition to a low carbon economy are important, and they in turn will protect the environment. But I'm saying that this is a longer term. So the things that we need to do now, a box that wasn't on that slide, previous slides, was about the regulatory strategy. So where organizations have a regulatory strategy, they need to update it. Where they don't have a clear regulatory strategy, they need to develop one. And that brings in not just the local elements of a lot of inspections, but also some of the global perspectives like climate change. Many permitting authorities will have pre-permit discussions with organizations prior to them actually having a permit. This is a great opportunity now to talk about low carbon alternatives for abatement and energy use. So we can get in at the planning stage of development and start to make changes. That's really important. We can help educate and inform business on what the latest techniques are. And this is a great opportunity for us. This last one is something that is, well, let's talk about climate change at the moment. We're talking about heat of about 1.1, 1.2 degrees. We're trying to keep it to 1.5. There's been talk of the last few weeks whether we'll make 1.8 or 1.7. In my lifetime, I've already seen climatic change here in Scotland. we already see far fewer frost days, less snow, higher intensity rainfall, more droughts. So we know climate change is already here. There's an opportunity for us to change our permit conditions to meet those new norms. So whether that's being prepared for drought, how they're going to deal with stormwater, whatever preparedness they need to have. So I've said that regulatory strategy needs to change. I'm going to put a couple of slides in here on this topic because this is really important. This sets the scene for the home framework of the regulatory organization. Traditional regulators' toolkit are not sufficient to tackle the climate emergency. I've got the compliance spectrum in the box on the bottom left, which goes from criminal to champion. There's 6 boxes in there. The EU Commission have adapted this and is in their compliance assurance scheme, and it's slightly modified, but the fundamentals are here. What you see on the ground is that most regulators' toolkit faces around criminal, chancer, and careless, and actually isn't particularly good at the criminal element. So there'll be some form of enforcement, normally administrative and fines and the like, but they don't necessarily drive change. We have to move from the left hand to the right hand. And what I mean is we have to cover both ends of the spectrum, not shift entirely to the right. So criminals, we need to close out as soon as possible, but we also need to enable, engage, and reward those that are going to go further. As I said, if everybody's compliant, we're still going to have negative impacts on climate change. So we need to take people further. The thing about the compliance spectrum is that's all about choice. It's about choice of the operator. There is sometimes when they will not have a choice, so they will not be able to comply. So I'm saying this is something different. This is incapable of complying. And when we find operators that are incapable, we need to develop the tools to support them to closure. And that's support them to closure in a way that does not damage the environment. So here's an example of a regulatory strategy. You can get it on SEPA's website. This is called One Planet Prosperity. It's all about living within what the resources that one planet has to offer. Here in Scotland, we live within 3 planets. Around the world, that changes depending on country. But this strategy sets out several things, but the first is that we have 2 principal strands here. One is about helping regulated businesses as much as possible to go beyond what they need to do. Some don't see this as a regulator's job. We see this as part of what we need to do to ensure the good quality of Scotland's environment and ensure that there's a good quality environment for the people of the future of Scotland. The other bit is we'll continue to drive all those remaining businesses who are not meeting the standards to comply. So compliance is non-negotiable. So we push hard at compliance, but we help people at the same time. And this is very much in line with the compliance spectrum that I showed a minute ago. So risk assessment is a process that regulators use to identify which sites that they will inspect, which ones that they will monitor. And most organizations will include in that high hazards. Some will talk about sites with a history of non-compliance. They should also now include sites of community concern, but importantly, and this is from a climate change perspective, sites that have an impact on strategic objectives. So if the ministry's objective is to, for instance, improve water quality in a certain area or have a positive impact on climate change, they need to be reflected in the risk assessment as well. So the obvious sites that would be in there would be things like large combustion plants, refineries, heavy emitters of climate gases. But also you need to start to move to look at other smaller sites that may have a negative impact, such as those emitting VOCs like dry cleaners, intensive cattle farms on a methane basis, closed illegal landfills, or storage of waste refrigerators, etc. These are quite small sites often, but we would often not visit them because they're so small, but because of their climate change impact, maybe it's time to actually revisit that premise. So compliance monitoring, this includes planned inspections, it includes sampling, it includes operator data returns. The principle here is to find significant issues and close them out as soon as possible. Once we've found a significant issue, it's wasted effort to keep looking for more issues at a site level. So we don't need to spend lots of time on the ground once we already know there's a problem. Find out there's a problem, fix it, and then move on to the next site. So we get through more sites as much as possible. Fundamental, I think inspectors should be paid to be in the field, not sitting behind desks writing reports. Nobody reads those reports. So, you know, 1-2 slides that are written in a way that an operator understands, pass it on, get them to make the changes. That's an important thing to do. Also looking at developing remote monitoring capabilities to give it added assurance. So a good example around Europe, Italy and Spain have the ability to, through law, to look at online emissions of incinerators, large combustion plants, refineries from the office. So that gives you the ability as a regulator to dial up at any time and find out what's going on at these big sites. Really important, useful tool for us. Also about planning timing of inspection based on the potential period of impact. So there's little point in visiting, for instance, a large sewage works when the water will be high. You visit during the summer when there's perhaps more of an impact. And it's the same if you've got a site that has potential impact on poor winter air quality, go in the winter, don't save it for the summer. Seems normal and obvious, but a lot of these things we don't do as standard. Compliance assessment. I believe in huge power of public and the markets and supply chains to drive change. Being open and transparent with our compliance information by default makes that information accessible. It allows people to make choice based on that information. There's also in here the ability for us to start to bring environmental performance into mix. So where we talked about in the compliance spectrum, rewarding the champions, it's how we do that. So looking at saying, okay, this site's done really well, it's reduced their emissions by X, this site hasn't, and give that information to the public if you can. I've talked about closing out all serious non-compliance, and I guess the focus on there is serious. If you have minor non-compliance that's not having an impact, although it's a non-compliance, by focusing on that takes up valuable regulators' time that you could be using elsewhere. So I think looking at significant issues, using sharp teeth, so having the tools to close out non-compliance, be it administrative or criminal, swift justice, and get things done. Also, from an environmental regulator's perspective, is working with partners to get this done. Great example, Al Capone, mafia boss, was not sent to jail because he'd killed lots of people. He was sent to jail because he failed to fill in his taxes correctly. We can work with other public sector regulators to close down sites, and we should be doing that. It's about partnership working, whatever gets the job done. Environmental complaints, often the unplanned inspections. So historically, we've said that some sites, some complaints we'll go to, some complaints we won't, and we have ways of dealing with that. because the environment is changing and has changed, we find that actually some small incident may now be having a large impact. So where we have low flow, that equals low dilution if there's a discharge. So things like burning of waste, where historically we may not have had the results, this may be a priority. It's important as well that we ensure that there's a feedback loop to the permit. So inspection and permit should always be talking to each other. So revocation of permits, most regulators are particularly bad at this. It's not a tool that they use often. It's often a difficult tool to use. We need to get better at this. When we move to supporting transition to a low carbon environment of many of these sites, for those sites that can't transition, we have to be able to help them move to a closure in a green and sustainable way. Last couple of slides. So we have a clear role to play as environmental regulators to protect the planet, support local communities, and enable transition to a green economy. That's very clear. We as regulators need to adapt, and we need to adapt now. One project that's particularly working at this area is Impel Climate Umbrella Project. I'm project lead for this. So please feel free to be involved in this and help drive it. And that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bingham. Yes, Mr. Bingham stated some important issues regarding the preparedness of the inspections regarding the climate change. First of all, reasons of the environmental regulation for climate change is very important. And so thanks for your nice demonstrations for the regulatory cycles in your presentation. Also, I believe that the risk assessment is the key point for success of the implementation, of course, together with the compliance monitoring and assessment for a good and the proper inspection. The key points of the presentation was related with the climate change, environmental permit changing. Also, the last project is a very important project. Maybe we can, after the question and answer session, we can continue with discussion, and because also I want to take some information about this project. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Erdem Görgün related with climate change environmental inspection, and the project is the strengthening environmental inspection capacity in Marmara Sea Basin in Turkey. Floor is yours, Mr. Görgün.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience. My name is Erdem Görgün from Istanbul Technical University, Environmental Engineering Department. I'm an environmental engineer working especially on the issues of environmental policy development, environmental regulations, licenses, permitting, and inspections issues. Now, I am going to give you a brief information about a project regarding to the environmental inspections to be applied to combat a special climate change effect called as mucilage occurred in Turkey during the first half of this year. The project is being conducted by our university in cooperation with 2 other universities in Turkey. Beneficiary and supporter of the project is Turkish Republic Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change with a new name. There in Glasgow, all together, we are witnessing an historical conference regarding to the future of the world. The decisions to be taken here, over there, actually, I am not with you, unfortunately, only online. I could access you, but these decisions will have a very important role in the struggle against climate change. First of all, we would like to thank the Republic of Turkey, Ministry of Environment, Urbanization, and Climate Change, and especially the General Manager of Environmental Impact Assessment, Audit and Monitoring Directorate, Mr. Mehrali Ecer, and his team, actually, for giving us the opportunity to speak at this important meeting. As you see, the name of our project is Strengthening Environmental Inspection Capacity in Marmara Sea Basin. And the names on the board you have seen are the university professors, the team members, and on the other hand, at the right side, Ministry of Environment officials. These two groups are comprising the old project group, and we are conducting everything all together. National Climate Change Strategy of Turkey actually is not new. It was approved by Higher Planning Council and put into force in May 2010, actually. It is more than 10 years ago. Turkey's national vision was established at this document as the climate change is to become a country fully integrating climate change related activities into its development policies, disseminating energy efficiency, increasing the use of clean and renewable energy resources, actively participating in the efforts for tackling climate change within its spatial circumstances, and providing its citizens with a high quality of life and welfare with low carbon intensity. And today, this vision is ongoing, actually. Turkey's strategic targets within the scope of basic principles are to integrate policies and measures for mitigating and adapting to climate change into national development plans, consistent with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and its spatial circumstances. Another target was to contribute to the greenhouse gas emission mitigation policies and measures within its own capacity by limiting the rate of growth of national greenhouse gas emissions without disrupting its development program aligned with sustainable development principles. And the last target, to increase national preparedness and capacity in order to avoid the adverse impacts of global climate change and adapt to these impacts. All these targets says that the inspection, environmental inspection, is highly important to reach these targets. When we look at the climate change concept, as we all know and talk about, it is making the ecosystem more sensitive and fragile. And every day, the level of this sensitivity and fragility is getting more than more. Besides, contribute to the global greenhouse gas emission mitigation policies and measures, protecting the ecosystem from these holistic effects is one of the criteria taken into consideration in Turkey's fight against climate change. Revising environmental inspections with this perspective is one of the important steps to be taken in this regard. One of the main objectives is to strengthen the environmental inspection practices in Turkey with the development technologies, taking into account the ecosystem sensitivities. As I mentioned at the beginning, with the mucilage phenomenon experienced in Marmara Sea, you can see at the map within the circle, in the first half of 2021, the necessity of reviewing the inspections, environmental inspections, especially regarding wastewater discharges, has emerged. And during this phenomenon, mucilage problem, our Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change announced a comprehensive action plan. It was on June, to combat the mucilage problem observed in Marmara Sea in the first half of 2021. At the photographs, you see the level of mucilage problem existed in the Marmara Sea. It was really horrible. What is mucilage? Mucilage is actually some of the living organisms, inorganic substances, dead cell residues, etc. They are natural microscopic aggregates rich in organic matter and are common in the open seas and oceans. Mucilage, also called sea snow or sea sputum, forms an important component of carbon transport and cycling in large bodies of water. The mucilage structure, which is defined as accumulation of organic matter produced by different microorganisms, depending on the climate and trophic conditions in marine ecosystems, has recently become an important threat to the marine ecosystem in Marmara and North Aegean in Turkey. It was first observed in 2007, but again, it was in the Marmara Sea. But in 2021, it was most intensely, and there is a possibility to reoccurrence in the coming days, actually. Not years, maybe days. So we have to do something. Due to the negative ecological, economic, social, and public health effects that mucilage creates, there are a lot of studies conducted by ministries, different ministries, universities, research institutes on the formation mechanism, monitoring, prevention, disposal, evaluation, and intervention methods of mucilage. We need all these kind of research and development projects, actually. There exist many studies on the acceleration of mucilage formation under the effect of climate change at the moment in Turkey. The Marmara Sea Action Plan, which I mentioned at the beginning, consists of 22 clauses, contains important emphasis on the control and supervision of wastewater sources discharged to the Marmara Sea. Later, there was another document which is the circular number 2021/13, published in Official Gazette of Turkey. The restrictions on the discharge of domestic and industrial wastewaters into Marmara Sea Basin were redefined, and it was more stringent. Deadlines were requested for investments, especially wastewater treatment plant investments, accordingly. And finally, at 5th of November 2021, Marmara Sea and islands has been declared as a special environmental protection area by a presidential decree. It was really a giant step to protect Marmara Sea from the effects of pollution coming from land-based sources. In order to solve the mucilage problem and control pollution in Marmara Sea, an effective environmental control system should be established and operated in accordance with the action plan and specific to the climate change effects to be observed in the basin. Strengthening the environmental inspection capacity of the Marmara Sea Basin project is a project created within this scope. The project has been initiated as of October 2021, very recently by the ministry, and the team, as I mentioned, will be Istanbul Technical University and some other officials, as well as the inspection experts of the ministry. What is the general aim of the project? It is determining the measures to be taken in order to strengthen the efficiency and capacity of environmental inspections carried out in the Marmara Sea hydrological basin, which constitutes the total area of sub-basins discharging into the Marmara Sea. The Marmara Sea is under the influence of many environmental factors due to its geographical location and dynamic structure. The sea, which has a coast to the provinces with the most populous population and developed industries, such as Istanbul, with the population of around 20 million, is also an important passageway between the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, with Istanbul and Dardanelles Straits as far as Aegean and European continents. It has an inland sea feature and has been under serious pollution pressures over the years by both land-based and diffuse pollutants. There are approximately 800 discharges into the basin. Major wastewater discharges include municipal wastewater treatment plant effluents. This is very important because of the high population capacity of the region. And also industrial wastewater treatment plant effluents arising from organized industrial zones, as well as individual industries. Marmara region, especially the east part of Marmara region, is the most industrialized region of Turkey. Therefore, industrial wastewaters are also very important pollutants to Marmara, especially food, textile, chemistry industries are located at this region. In this context, the environmental inspection practices carried out regarding all kinds of activities that discharge wastewater into the Marmara Sea, which is declared as a special environmental protection area, will be reviewed. Under the climate change conditions, the activities to be carried out will be determined by taking into account the absorptive capacity of the Sea of Marmara. The objectives of the project can be summarized as revision of subject-based checklists used in the environmental audit practices, creating sector-based checklists to be used in environmental audit applications, testing the created and revised lists in the field by visiting the industries, reviewing the minimum criteria in audits, searching the use of remote sensing technologies. This is also a very important component of the project. Remote sensing emerging technologies will be used. Preparation and submission of wastewater inspection plans for the provinces of these 6 cities, namely Tekirdağ, Istanbul, Kocaeli, Yalova, Bursa, Balıkesir, and Çanakkale. In this sense, in line with the requirements of climate change, an environmental inspection plan is expected to be prepared in order to prevent any probable ecological climate-related hazards. This plan will be applicable to region-specific requirements and standardized in terms of minimum criteria, and thus risk assessment also can be made based on the pollutant load and discharge location. As for conclusion, in this new era that we are entering in the struggle against climate change, environmental inspections and audits also need to be reviewed and harmonized accordingly. I would like to thank you all for listening this presentation. If you have any question, I'm ready to answer. I would like to highlight that as seen at the visual on the table. It's possible to win this problem if we come all together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Görgen, for your valuable contributions for this event. As Mr. Görgen said, the Marmara is the most crowded and the most industrial region in Turkey. And the mucilage in this year was a high topic. And we may maybe correlate with the effect of the climate change. And also in the scope of the project in the long-term mitigation activities maybe should be considered the actions proposed in the plan, and maybe in the environmental inspection plan should be considered in the climate basis. Yes, now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Pınar Ece Karaç for their presentation. This floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to all participants. Just 1 minute, and then a second. Yeah. Sure. Welcome again. My name is Pınar Ece Karaç. I'm an environmental inspector and I work as at the Ministry of Environment and Inspection Department as environmental inspector. I want to show that this the last development on climate change about environmental legislation and inspection department. What we can do that, how legislation employment can show that. Actually, climate change or climate crisis, what can we do? What can we say is that, as you know, climate change is an emerging crisis of our time, and it is happening even more quickly than we feared. Unsustainable development in the past and time present is the root cause of climate change. Turkish legislation and environmental inspection, another important issue. As you know, the Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change is the central authority responsible for environment, urbanism, and combating climate change management and implementation. And the General Directorate of Environmental Impact Assessment, Permit and Inspection, which is the unit the ministry responsible for execution of environmental legislation, such as carrying out environmental impact assessment issues, permit writing and licensing, and environmental inspection, and offshore strategic development at the national level and for large-scale facilities in principle. Under the umbrella Department of Environmental Impact Assessment, Monitoring and Environmental Inspection is responsible for implementing environmental law and carrying out inspections. In accordance with Environmental Law number 2017-72 and by Law on Environmental Inspection enacted in accordance with this law, enforcement mission in enforcement doing site inspection and control of documents by Department of EAA, Monitoring and Environmental Inspection and offshore respective bylaws. I want to show by way of example of environmental inspection, shore facilities, tailings dam and wastewater treatment and solid waste inspection, or marble quarry and offshore thermal power station is important that climate change effects of that. Is important department of environmental impact assessment, monitoring and environmental inspection do inspections countrywide and impose administrative fines to facilities or natural or legal persons detected to acting contrary to legislation in the scope of Article 20 of this law, and they make a decision of the total stop to activity. Offshore, there's another important issue, mucilage. In early summer of this year, an intense formation of sea snot or mucilage and overgrowth of phytoplankton, which is the first step of biological production in the sea, has occurred in the Marmara Sea. In order to solve the mucilage problem, the Marmara Sea Action Plan, including restriction measures regarding all kinds of pollutant sources reaching the Marmara Sea, was prepared and put into force urgently. Therefore, number of environmental inspection has been increased in facilities that discharge into the Marmara Sea. And moreover, seawater quality monitoring points in the Marmara Sea is increased. However, a joint international effort is required to prevent the increase in the seawater temperatures caused by climate change offshore. And you can show this mucilage problem in this inspection area, and it was during time 5 or 6 months, a long time. What we did that, you can show this number, inspection number. This number is environmental inspection were carried out 150 facilities that violate this legislation were banned from operating, and administrating fine 931,006,000 Turkish liras was imposed, and more than 2,000 wastewater samples were examined. Environmental inspectors were on the field. 7 and 20 activities are ongoing offshore. And another disaster, observed results of climate change in Turkey, and as you know, wildfires. The condition that paved the way for these exceptional forest fires are all linked to climate change directly. With climate change raising temperatures, decreasing rainfall, and increasing rainfall variability around the Eastern Mediterranean, such heat waves are forecast to increase further, and the probability of intense rainfall even more expected to increase. As you know, it was terrible disaster. You can show this. The wildfires that raged across the Mediterranean for the past few months have brought levels of devastation to the southern coast of country not seen in decades, especially at Muğla and Antalya cities. As a result, immense wildfires began burning around July 2028, and the majority were extinguished within 2 weeks. Nearly 300 blazes in 14/7 province consumed. It was caused huge environmental damage, major destruction, and the total sources area that is 9 times the average of previous years. Unfortunately, 9 lives were lost and tens of thousands were evacuated as the flames approached villages and cities in Antalya, Muğla, Aydın, Isparta, and Denizli. In addition to the death of thousands of farm animals and countless trees, the delicate ecosystem that developed around pine forests and olive groves were also decimated. In the forest fire that broke out on August 5 in Muğla, Milas, the flames reached the garden of Kemerköy thermal power plant. Flammable liquids and gases, oil, and explosive chemicals, especially hydrogen and gas fuel, were evacuated together with the staff. and necessary precautions were taken to the highest level in the coal-fired production was stopped. After being reached flame, the same preventions were taken immediately at Yeniköy thermal power plants, is approximately 10 kilometers away from Kemerköy thermal power plants. You can show this, that fire time. Another disaster in area Karadeniz was happened, flood and mudslide disaster. Karadeniz area, as the fires in the Mediterranean were extinguished, it's the north of Turkey is experienced a different climate disaster. Intense rainfall in the flood-prone Black Sea region has led to flash floods and landslide that killed tens of people in Kastamonu, Sinop, and Bartın, left many unaccounted for, and destroyed building and bridges. You can show that Kastamonu Basin through this flood disaster. Let's show this picture. As a result, in the disaster, at least 72 people lost their lives in Kastamonu, Sinop, and Bartın, and 77 people have been reported missing. Torrential rains that pounded this area caused flooding that demolished homes, severed at least 5 bridges, swept away cars, and rendered numerous roads impassable. So, climate change is an exclamation mark on a summer of unprecedented heat, drought, wildfires, and flooding. If we don't do that, so we don't make the for result-based precautions and not change our policy, we will reach the point of no return. Offshore, we have to say is that the role of inspection in tackling the climate change. Environmental inspection are the unique control mechanisms carried out the purpose of protecting the environment, ensuring compliance with the legislation, fulfilling environmental requirements and obligations, and controlling the effectiveness of environmental management. All activities having a pollution effect of the environment and contributed in particular human-induced climate change are subject to environmental inspection. Strengthening environmental inspection capacity in Marmara Sea Basin project, which we carried out jointly with Istanbul Technical University, is continued in order to increase national preparedness and capacity to evade the adverse impact of global climate change and to adapt to these impacts. Dear Mr. Hüseyin Erdem Görgün shows that another different detail I can that has. Main topic of the project: capacity building for inspection, identification of risk facilities, planning of inspection with risk assessment method, using remote sensing system in inspections. Only in the first 10 months of 2021, the huge number of environmental inspections were carried out at an estimated find of approximately 2,050 million to was imposed on the 3,200. So anyway, many of facilities operating in violation of the environmental law. The activities of 2015-8 facilities which were found to be operating in violation of the procedures and principles specified in environmental legislation were stopped. Another important issue is joining in Impel project. We have been joining at maybe more 10 years. I'm not sure, maybe you can show this. Simon, our ministry has been actively participating in Impel, the European Union network for implementation and enforcement of environmental law activities since 2005. Within the scope of Impel network activities in 1718, a project was carried out with Impel to define regulatory instrument. Research has been conducted on the methods, inspection, administrative files, volunteering, incentives to be used to achieve compliance with the project. Two separate environmental performance reviews were conducted by OECD for Turkey in 1818 and 2007. Turkey's third environmental performance review report was published in February in 1718. In this state report, it has been evaluated that Turkey started to adopt a risk-based approach to inspection planning in the line with good international practice, and environmental inspections have increased over the years. How we can do inspection plan, how we can do inspection tools, how we can use inspection mechanisms. Actually, tools used in environmental inspections, the first inspection system and drone and mobile waste tracking system, mobile monitoring networking. We have do that and other different toolbars. For example, with the mobile waste tracking system, we monitor the hazardous waste transportation process. We ensure the safe transportation and disposal for 3 million tons of hazardous waste from beginning to ending. We regularly monitor the water quality in our scenes in cooperation with TÜBİTAK and Middle East Technical University, with our monitoring network consisting of 9,001 points in the Sea of Marmara points in all our seas. In order to identify the effects of mucilage and the triggering factors after mucilage, we started researches by increasing the number of monitoring points in the Marmara Sea to 1,500 stations. In June and September this year, we further expanded our monitoring activities in Marmara and performed monitoring a total of 441 points. Yes, okay. I'm sure that. You can show this online monitoring air qualification station, and offshore we can do 8 clean air status directories. We monitor the pollution and quality status at a total of 4,073 stations in all our seas. In accordance with the Paris Climate Agreement, all facilities that have an impact on climate change should be answered to use innovative production methods. Their impact on the environment should be minimized. In other words, all facilities have to adapt to the climate change adaptation process and have to make their plans with this in mind. Whether or not the climate pledges are fulfilled and the compliance of facilities to legislation which are existing and will come into force will inspect by our ministry within this period. The Grand National Assembly of Turkey, in order to determination precautions must be taken concerning the establishment of the commission working on minimization of the effects of global climate change, technical growth, and effective use of the water research was published in Official Gazette number 20 June in this year. It was made a decision about creating route map technique against climate change. Turkey Presidential Action Plan on the European Green Deal, which has been on the country's agenda for a while under the name of Green Reconciliation Action Plan, was published in the Official Gazette July 18. If we look at it from an environmental perspective, in the circular aims effectively to the global fight against climate change. Ministry is the national focal point on climate change and executes the national coordination duty for all issues related about climate change. In order to make Turkey an important actor in the challenging global climate change environment and to achieve the net zero emission target for 2053 and administrative change was necessary. A restructuring process was initiated as the Minister of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change with the presidential degree into force by being published in the Official Gazette. To achieve the goal, Climate Change and Adaptation Coordination Board and the Climate Change Presidency were established. In fact, the General Directorate of Combating Desertification and Erosion and the General Directorate of Meteorology were included in the ministry. The Paris Climate Agreement, which Turkey's parliament ratified in October, entered into effect today, this day, according to a presidential decree. This acceptance is a revolutionary step that will be a turning point in Turkey's green development move. As of today, it has begun. In light of this fact, Turkey adopted the target of net zero carbon emission by 1753. And another project, another strategic plan about mucilage on climate adaptation, climate change adaptation strategy on Black Sea region climate change. The future effects of climate change policy on inspection is important. Another issue, offshore, we will affect this development. Undoubtedly, the last point arriving in the climate crisis and the legislation regulations happened in this direction in Turkey will lead to radical change in implementation. Particularly, environmental inspection will become significant issue in terms of adaptation and mitigation to climate change as unique control mechanism. Completing and putting into practice work on the National Climate Change Strategy and National Climate Change Action Plan updated with our this year target as of next year. Completing the work on the climate law, which will become as the umbrella legislation in implementation. Establishing adaptation, prevention, and inspection mechanism in the technique against climate change by making the necessary amendments in the environmental law and the relevant legislation which is currently being implemented. Reducing greenhouse gas emission to net zero by 2025 within the framework of the principle of shared but differentiated responsibilities. Increasing and developing the capacity and effectiveness of environmental inspection with climate change as the main focus. For example, number of environmental inspector and number of inspection, number of monitoring, etc. Defining the facilities or activities that have an impact on climate change as risk criteria when planning risk-based environmental inspection. Revising the risk assessment steps and method for evaluation of facilities that have an impact on climate change and environmental inspection. Establishing tools that environmental inspection efforts by using the best available technology and data, realizing adaptation, implementation from local to central at varying scales and levels, inspecting and monitoring of compliance processes, inspection, monitoring, and evaluated processes from environmental aspect, the efficiency of the current policies in the context of climate change adaptation, inspection and monitoring and of industrial facilities about carbon border adjustment, increasing of inspection in order to protect biodiversity and ecosystems, terrestrial and marine ecosystems. Inspection whether lived up to climate pledges and the obligation by the facilities are fulfilled in the climate adaptation process or not. For instance, could fire power plants inspection in terms of transition of the BATs or another new technology or another different methodologies. We will open that. Increasing number of inspection of landfill on the purpose of reducing greenhouse gas emission based on zero waste target, increasing the waste inspection about the deposit refund system and the collection system we have developed for Turkey, and other tasks not specified here. So these are the fundamental studies waiting us in regards to environmental inspection from this day forth. Absolutely, environmental inspection will play an important role in the challenge against climate change. Thank you for attention. If you have any question, I will answer this. So it's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you Mr. Karaç, for your presentation. Yes, dear participants, today we listened three important presentations regarding the environmental inspection, regarding the future effects of climate policy on environmental inspections, and changing the rules of engagement with respect to climate change, and our project in Turkey regarding the strengthening environmental inspection capacity in Marmara Sea Basin. Also, I would like to remind that this event will be published in our YouTube channel of our ministry. I know we have some time constraints, but I would like to open the question and answer session. If you have some questions, you can ask our panelists your questions. If don't have, also I have one question, as I said in the beginning, after your presentation, this Impel umbrella project, considering our time constraint, if you say some short wordings about the scope or content of the project, I will be grateful.
Okay, thank you. So the Impel umbrella project, looking at climate change, looking at how regulators can adapt over the coming years as we must to meet the changes that are here and will be more apparent with time. So this looks at how we regulate. So based on my presentation, it looks at how we use remote technologies, how we look at risk assessment, how we develop our strategies. It's a multi-year project, so it's already running, and you're welcome to join. In fact, I would encourage you to do so. That would be brilliant.
Okay. About the topic, if there is not any question, I would like to invite our panelists to the floor to take a photo together, also by showing the participants who connected with Zoom, if it's possible.
Hello, actually I have a question. If you...
Şenay Hanım, also sesinizi alamadım ben.
I have a question, but I don't know if we have time or not.
You can ask your question, and then we can answer. We can try to answer shortly.
Okay, good morning. My name is Şenay Arslan, and I am environmental inspector in the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. And I'm also Impel National Coordinator of Turkey. First of all, I want to thank to Simon that he accepted our invitation for this panel. And thanks for the joining this panel also, Mr. Erdem Gürgen. My question is about planning time of inspection based on potential period of impact that Simon mentioned in his presentation. And this subject is really interesting for us because we carried out inspection planning. And also, maybe Simon, you know, there is a subgroup working on this subject, actually in IED project in Impel. And this subgroup name is, this subgroup work on development of RAM method. And now we discuss about the timing criteria for inspection. I want to know that if there is any application in Scotland risk assessment system that consider also time assessment. And if yes, maybe it will be helpful for this subgroup study. We will have meeting tomorrow, and I want to mention this subject in this meeting.
Okay. Yeah. So in the Scottish system, inspections aren't programmed in a particular date or period at the beginning of the year. That's based on local circumstances. It gives regulatory teams the ability to choose when the greatest impact of that site will be. and therefore to inspect accordingly. It may be that you would do, say, 2 inspections in the summer and none in the winter. I mean, it can all depend on the site and what the potential impacts are. So for instance, I used to inspect sites only in the skiing season because that's when the impact was. I mean, it really depends. And I think it's having the flexibility to choose is really important. So rather than saying necessarily at the beginning of every year, here's an inspection every quarter of this site, it's actually using the information that you have available, looking at the climatic conditions, and then choosing appropriate time spots. So is it drought? Is it summer fires? Is it winter flooding? Whatever the potential impacts are, and then basing your inspection time around that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much also for your response. Yes, now I would like to invite you floor to take a photo together. Okay. Fotoğraf. Şöyle Şenay çıksın. Thank you very much.